Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our harmonic balancer. This is also considered your crank pulley, and with that said, it's the pulley that's closest to the lower aspect of the engine. To gain access to be able to remove it, there's going to be some things along the top that we have to get out of the way. We'll remove this top plastic plate by removing 3 7mm headed screws. Set that aside. With that out of the way, let's continue on to this area. We're going to go ahead and remove it. To get it off, you're going to find that you have 2 clamps, one on either side. One very close to your throttle body. We'll use an 8mm or a flathead screwdriver to loosen that. And then all the way at the far end, there's another one. Same thing, flathead or 8mm. Go ahead and loosen those clamps. Once you have those loosened, continue on to this area right here. This hose pulls out fairly easily if you just grab onto the hose and the tube and give it a little tug. Give it a quick inspection. Go ahead and set that aside. Now along this area, you're going to find that you have a wiring harness with a tab that goes into your air inlet tube. We're just going to carefully pry it out of there. This comes out fairly easily overall with a trim tool. Give it a quick inspection. Go ahead and set that aside. Now we're going to grab the air inlet tube and we're going to give it a little wiggle. We're trying to separate it from the throttle body and from the air filter housing. Go ahead and give that a quick inspection. Make sure it's not torn or worn in any way. This looks fine. I'll set it aside. Now the next thing we're going to have to do is move along to removing the fan from the water pump. To do that, you're going to want to have a fan clutch removal tool. Looks a little like this, and it's a good idea to have an air chisel of some sort. Otherwise, if you had to, you can continue on with a 36mm wrench and a rubber mallet. I'll just come right down to the mounting nut that holds the fan to the water pump. We'll slide it right on there and turn this counterclockwise. Once you have it broken free, continue on by carefully removing it from the water pump. As I continue spinning this off, I'm going to pay close attention. I want to make sure that as it gets close to the very end, I'm holding on to it. We don't want the fan to fall down and potentially damage the radiator, which is located in this area. There we are. Now I'll rest this down, and we're going to continue on by removing the fan shroud. To remove the fan shroud, you're going to want to look along each side of it. You'll find a 10mm headed bolt for either side. Remove the pair. Now we can carefully grab onto the fan shroud and we'll give it a little wiggle. As we start pulling it away from the radiator, you also want to be pulling up. There are 2 latches, one on either side, down a little lower from where each of those bolts were. Now once that breaks free, we're going to carefully start lifting this up and out of here. At the same time as we lift the shroud out, we also want to be trying to lift the fan out. Once again, you need to be extremely careful not to damage the radiator, which is along this forward area. We'll get the fan out of there for now. Go ahead and fully remove that fan shroud as well. Okay, now the next thing you want to do is pay close attention to your belt routing. What I mean by that is that there's some pulleys that it goes up and over, and there's other smooth pulleys that it goes down and around. So just pay attention. Once you take a quick note of that, let's continue on by using a 3/8 ratchet or serpentine belt tool and come down to the serpentine belt tensioner. We'll slide this right into the little square notch. Once you've got it in there, you can continue by turning this counterclockwise to release the tension. And then we'll slide the belt off of the idler pulley. Go ahead and get your tool out of there, and we'll fully remove the serpentine belt. Once you have the belt out of there, just give it a quick inspection. Make sure you don't see a whole bunch of cracks or dry rot. This one looks fine, so I'll set it aside. The next thing you want to do is have a look in the center of that harmonic balancer. You're going to find that you have a 19mm headed bolt deep down in the center. We're going to have to go ahead and remove that. I'll grab my 19mm socket and an air gun and zip it right out. Go ahead and remove that bolt. Give it a quick inspection. For the removal process of the harmonic balancer, you're either going to need a specialty tool to hold the harmonic balancer from spinning, or you're going to have to remove the starter. If you're removing the starter, the first thing you have to do is make your way over here to the negative battery terminal. We'll go ahead and use an 8mm to loosen this. And then remove the wiring from the battery. Now from underneath the front of the vehicle, we're going to remove this plastic shield. You're going to find 3 8mm headed bolts that go across the front. Go ahead and remove all 3. Once you have all 3 of those out, make your way along to each of the sides. For each side, you're going to find 2 10mm headed bolts. Go ahead and remove all 4 bolts. Now that we have all the mounting bolts out of there, you're going to find that you have 1 push clip on both sides. So I'm going to use my trim tool and I'll remove each of them. Make sure you hold onto that shield for the last one. Go ahead and carefully pull the shield down. Remove it from the vehicle. Now let's continue on with our crank bolt. I'm also going to use a 19mm socket and an extension. You'll notice on my socket, I went ahead and I marked it with some crayon all the way down along the edge here. The reason for that is because I'm going to go ahead and take the bolt and I'm going to put it in 6 turns. So once I put this on here, I'll go ahead and start it in there, and we're going to go ahead and watch this come around 6 times and then pause. One, 2, 3, and so on. Now it's time to move over to the starter. We're going to start disconnecting the wire that comes right over here. To get this off of here, we'll use a 13mm socket. Grab that wire, remove it, and give it a quick inspection. You want to make sure it doesn't look like it's weak, rotted, or damaged in any way. And if you see any funny colors, it's probably corrosion, and that would need to be dealt with. Go ahead and set it aside. Now that we have the ground wire off, we're going to move up to this area. Looking up where my pick is, you're going to find a red cover. Go ahead and carefully pop that off of there. Give it a quick inspection. You're going to be reusing this, so go ahead and set it aside. Now that we have the cover out of the way, let's move along to this 10mm headed nut. We'll remove the nut and then remove the wire and give it a close inspection. Make sure that's not rotted, corroded, or weak. That feels fine. We'll clean it up later. Set that aside. Now that we set this wire aside, look directly above it. You're going to find another larger wire. To remove this one, we'll use a 13mm. We'll grab onto that wiring harness, give it a little wiggle. Should want to slide right off of there. Give the wires a quick inspection. Set those aside. Now we can start removing our 2 mounting bolts. You'll find a 13mm studded bolt down here. Directly above it, you'll find another 13mm bolt. Go ahead and remove the pair. Now that one's loose, I'll go ahead and hold that starter in place and fully remove my last bolt. Go ahead and grab that starter and pull it out towards the front of the transmission. Give it a quick inspection and set that aside. Now with the starter out of the way, we have clear access to the flywheel. That's important to have access to because we're going to need to hold this still while we continue up at the crank. Now we're going to continue on with our balancer puller tool. It's important to make sure you have something at the end of this as an adapter. I like to put a little bit of lubricant to help ensure things flow easily. Now I'm just going to take the tool and I'll put it up inside and I'm going to put that adapter directly against the bolt. Now I'm going to line up the slots on the tool so I can put my bolts through their mounting holes in the crank pulley. Once I have both of these in there, I'll go ahead and center it and start snugging it. Now for the next part, I'm going to use a pry bar. I want to come right up inside this area here. Looking up along where the tip of my pry bar is, you're going to find that you have a stud with a nut. I'm going to bring my pry bar all the way down here, and then I'm going to make my way over to the tool that's on the crank. I'll start turning that clockwise, which will bring this nut down and lock it in against my pry bar. Yeah, it's coming right off. Keep in mind that once this releases, it could potentially fall down. Be as safe as possible. Now at this point, I can see the harmonic balancer moving around on my crankshaft. I'm going to pause with removing it and fully remove my tool first. Now we'll just carefully get this out of here. There it is, friends. Now once you have the harmonic balancer off of there, go ahead and take a peek at the seal that's located behind where the balancer was. You want to give it a clear inspection and make sure it doesn't look torn or worn or damaged in any way. If you had happened to seen that there was oil coming out of this area, and maybe that's the reason why you have to replace the harmonic balancer, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace the seal. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and wipe it down, we'll give it that inspection, and then we'll get ready to install our new balancer. Okay friends, now it's going to be time to install our brand new harmonic balancer. Let's have a look at the back side, where the shaft is supposed to go into. You're going to notice where my index finger is has a little notch. That's important to note and pay attention to. You'll also notice that I put a thin coating of lubricant along this area so the shaft will slide in easier. You're going to find you have a little area that's supposed to line up with the hole in the pulley. Let's go ahead and carefully start lining this up, and then we'll start gently pressing it in. So all I did right there is I just rotated it until I felt like it wanted to slide in a little bit. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to press this in by hand. We're going to continue with our pulley pressing tool. Now that we have that started on there, let's go ahead and put in our mounting tool. I'll put in my center bolt as far as I can, so I'm sure that the threads are in there as far as they can go. Now I'm going to continue by turning this area. Now the next thing you want to do after your tool's bottomed out is get ready to continue tightening this nut. You don't want to try turning the bolt that goes into the shaft because we're not concentrating on turning the engine over. We only want to push this pulley in. Now we're going to carefully start turning this in, ensuring that we're not binding in any way. Now as we turn this in, pay attention to this area right here, very close to where the harmonic balancer is going to mount up next to the engine. Now this plastic piece right here should be almost touching. It shouldn't necessarily be hitting up against it because you don't want any drag or damage, but you do want to make sure that it's as close as possible. Essentially, this should bottom out by the time we get there. Okay, so right there I'm feeling a little bit of pressure. Just going to make sure that it's completely bottomed out. Now I'll go ahead and remove my tool. Now it's going to be time to put in our center mounting bolt. Before you do, go ahead and inspect the threaded area. Make sure it doesn't look rotted or damaged in any way. After that, go ahead and apply some lubricant, whether it's penetrant or even engine oil. Make sure that's well lubricated, and now we can get ready for our installation. Make sure you start that in by hand so you're sure that there's no way it's cross-threading into the engine. Once you have the crank bolt bottomed out, go ahead and torque that in 2 stages. The first stage will be to 37 foot-pounds. Now the next thing you're going to want to do after you've torqued this is to torque it an additional 90 degrees. All right, there it is. Now it's time to move back over to the transmission where the starter is supposed to go. Go ahead and clean the plate. Make sure there's no debris in this area. Once you have that cleaned down, continue on to doing the same thing to the starter. Let's go ahead and reinstall that starter now. Once you have it up and in place, go ahead and start in both of your mounting bolts before you tighten either of them. The lower bolt is the one that has the stud protruding out. Start that upper one in there as well. Go ahead and bottom them out. Once they're both bottomed out, torque each of them to 18 foot-pounds. Once you have both of those mounting bolts torqued, continue on to cleaning up each of your 3 wires. What I mean by that is on the very end, where the terminal is supposed to connect onto, you want to make sure it doesn't have any debris or anything that's going to be in the way. Go ahead and sand it down. We'll make sure we do both sides of each wire. That one looks great. I'll do the same to the rest. Now, once you have all of your wires cleaned, let's go ahead and start remounting them. I'm going to start with the main power wire. That's the larger wire here. That goes all the way up onto the top stud on the starter solenoid. Go ahead and start it on there and snug it up. When I'm tightening these, I only like to use a 1/4-inch ratchet. I don't want to try to over tighten it and break the starter in any way. Okay, so right there it feels as though it bottomed out. Now I'm just going to take my ratchet with one index finger and I'll just go ahead and try to torque it down. Grab that wire, give it a wiggle, make sure it's completely secured. If it wiggles around on the post, it's not tight enough. Once you have that one tight, continue on to the smaller wire. Start the knot on there and snug that one up as well. All right, so that one bottomed out right there. I'm going to continue on by doing the same exact thing. Keep in mind, this is a much smaller stud. It won't take very much pressure to break it. Give that wire a wiggle, make sure it's secure. Let's get that ground wire on there. Start the nut on, bottom it out. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now that we have the wires on there, let's continue on to putting on our protective cover. I'll take this and line it up so it covers all 3 of my studs and press it in. Once you hear a click, go ahead and give it a little wiggle to make sure it's secure. All right, so now that we have that installed, let's move along to our protective shield. We want to pay attention to where our transmission cooler lines come through. We're just going to go ahead and slide the plate up over that. Now we'll make our way along each side. We want to line up the push clip with its corresponding hole, slide it in. I'll do the same on the other side real quick. Once you have both of those in, continue on with your 4 mounting bolts. I'll start each of these in. Once all 4 are started, we can go ahead and bottom them out and snug them up. Now that we have those bolts in, let's continue on to these. Obviously, you want to make sure all of those are nice and tight. Now back under the hood, we're going to continue on by reinstalling our Serpentine belt. Let's take one end of the belt, we'll bring it down and put it over that crank pulley that we just installed. Now let's take this side right here, we'll put the flat surface up against the pulley. We're going to swing it down, put it around that AC compressor. Go ahead and slide it into all those grooves. Now I'm just going to go ahead and hold upward pressure on that. We'll continue on with the passenger side of the belt. We're going to have to swing this over and put it around the tensioner pulley, all the way on the far passenger side. Carefully slide it in between here. There we are. Make sure it's sitting inside of all of those grooves. Make sure that's sitting in the grooves as well. We'll take this area and bring it right up and over the alternator pulley. And now the next thing you want to do is continue on by putting it over the power steering pump pulley and then hold some pressure on the belt as if you're about to pull it underneath the idler pulley here. Let's put our Serpentine belt tensioner tool into the tensioner there. Turn that counterclockwise to release tension and slide the belt underneath your idler pulley. Now I'm going to release the pressure here. I'll remove my tool and I'm going to double check my belt. You want to ensure that the belt is sitting inside the grooves of all the grooved pulleys. That one feels good. Make my way down here, all the way down to that harmonic balancer or crank pulley. Double check. Assuming that feels good, you can continue on with your installation. Now that we have the Serpentine belt on there, let's continue on with our fan and our fan shroud. As you start sliding it down along each side, you're going to want to make sure that it fits into its grooves that are along the radiator. Let's go ahead and carefully rest that fan down so it's causing no damage to our radiator, and we'll line up the fan shroud. Once you have this pressed up against the radiator and slid down, let's continue on with the fan. We're just going to take that by hand and start turning it on until it bottoms out. Now that I have it started on there, I'll go ahead and spin the fan on. Once you have it bottomed out, just give it a couple loving bonks to make sure it's secure. Now we can put in the mounting bolts for the fan shroud. Now it's time to move along to our air inlet tube. You want to make sure you put this in the proper direction. We have the area that has the hose that goes into the side. That's going to go closest to the mass airflow sensor, so this tube can connect into it. Now the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and tighten up my clamps. Before we tighten them, I want to mention it's important to make sure you have it completely bottomed out, whether it's against the throttle body here or against the mass airflow sensor area on the other side. Make sure those clamps are nice and tight so there's no dirty or unmetered air getting sucked into the engine. Now let's continue on to this tube. Go ahead and give this a tug, press this in. Give that a tug to make sure it's secure. We'll move along to the mass airflow sensor wiring. You want to make sure this is secure as well. That just slides right into the air inlet tube. Now we can put on our plastic cover. We have our 3 mounting bolt holes. You want to make sure they line up with the 3 mounting bolt holes on the plastic intake. Commonly, the easiest one to start putting in first would be the one on the far end. You can go ahead and lift this up, move it around as needed to get it lined up. Now that I have that one started in by hand, I'll continue on to the other 2. Once all 3 of them are fully started in, we can go ahead and snug them up. Once you have everything back together, continue on by putting on your negative battery terminal. Slide that down as far as it can go, and then make sure it's nice and tight.